Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and it's time to review the third episode of Primal with the nice, happy title, A Cold Death. This is gonna be a fun, light-hearted episode review. So this is the episode with the mammoths, just in case you forgot this show was a fantasy and not a nature documentary. And it's set in this frozen tundra. Everything about the atmosphere is just designed to make you feel cold. And also kind of isolated, because it feels so barren, the whole landscape. But perhaps that's most articulated with the mammoth we're introduced to at the beginning. In many ways, this episode is about that mammoth more than it's about anything else. Spear and Fang are still the protagonists, but everything that happens in this episode somehow relates back to that old mammoth. And man, when it comes to visual storytelling, there is just so much you can derive from this mammoth's design. He's got faded, grayish fur all over his body. Well, actually not all over his body, because there are large patches of him that are devoid of fur and look like scars from past battles that he's survived. He's missing an entire tusk. His eyes have heavy lids. His movements are very slow. This is a mammoth who has lived through a lot and who has seen some stuff. And your heart just goes out to him the minute you see him. And it gets even worse when you see that there's this whole herd of mammoths that he's following, and they're all much younger and far more robust than him, and they just sort of leave him behind during this blizzard because he can't keep up, and he just makes such pathetic sounds. Yeah, I feel for this mammoth, let me tell you. If you don't feel for the mammoth, you're dead inside. That's just the truth of it. You get the sense that this guy's gonna die anyway. This is a mammoth who is at the end of his life. But that doesn't make it any easier to see Spear and Fang go on the attack and kill him just because they need to survive. And that does set up the battle, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to say that this episode once again shows us more layers to our two protagonists. In particular, it emphasizes how even though they are on the same page now, they're still very different from each other. Through Spear's actions and through another flashback, we learn that he is not just a heartless killer. He actually values life on some level. He does still kill. He has to kill in order to survive. He needs meat just as much as he needs vegetables. But that doesn't mean he kills without feeling anything. In fact, during the struggle with the mammoth, just before it ends, he gets this look on his face like he's steeling himself up because he makes eye contact with the mammoth, and he's like at first his face is almost neutral, and then he just grits his teeth, furrows his brow, he's like, I'm doing it! Bashes the rock into the mammoth's head. But then as the mammoth takes its final breaths, his expression softens, he places a hand on it, and he's got this expression like, I'm sorry, I really am, but it had to be done, and we will make good use of you. Almost sort of like an old Native American kind of outlook, where, you know, the old tradition, they use every part of the buffalo. Kinda like that, almost. He clearly has that empathy, and we see that it's nothing new. The flashback shows us the first time Spear took his son hunting and, well, maybe not the first time he took him hunting, but the first time his son participated in the hunt, at the very least. And we see that that empathy was already there when they kill a prehistoric deer, and he does almost the exact same thing. He shows no mercy in taking the thing's life, but he bows his head and pays respect to it once the life is taken. He knows that this is the price that must be paid, and he will pay it, but that doesn't mean it costs him nothing. That's a very convoluted way of saying it, I realize, but that's basically what I got out of it, at least. But you contrast that with Fang. It's not that Fang is heartless. We know by now that she has emotions, she does care, but she doesn't really care about her prey. She's a carnivorous dinosaur. Killing to survive is just what she does, and she probably doesn't even think twice about it. She thinks about that the same way a human would think of picking an apple from a tree. We don't think that the apple is suddenly dead any more than Fang would think about her prey suddenly being dead. So she doesn't pay those respects. She doesn't get why Spear gets so melancholy after these sort of things. She's just like, well, you hesitate all you want, pal, but I'm going in, and starts eating. But even with that difference established, we're still reminded that she's not heartless. There's a moment where, after they've killed the mammoth and they're looking for shelter during this blizzard, she loses track of Spear. And she starts frantically looking around and calling for him. And it's a wonder she finds him again. Of course, you know she's going to. It's only the halfway point of the whole show. But there is this real sense you get that she does care. It's just that she only cares about creatures she considers equal to her, and she doesn't consider prey to be equal. She considers Spear her equal, but anything else, it's just food. And before I forget to mention it, the last episode and this one do provide us with brief moments of levity. Not laugh-out-loud gag humor like what you would have seen in Genndy Tartakovsky's early work like Dexter's Laboratory, but still little bits that just sort of make you chuckle and relieve a bit of the otherwise relentless drama and tension. In River of Snakes, it came from Spear's reactions to how poorly he was prepared for some of Fang's habits. And in this episode, it comes from things like, after they've killed the mammoth, Spear has made a sled out of its bones and piled all of the spare meat on top of it. He makes a harness out of some strands of fur and a tusk, and he hands it to Fang, like, you're gonna pull this. And Fang just sort of looks at the harness and immediately turns around and walks away. Either she doesn't get it, or she's just like, yeah, screw you, pal. And either way, I mean, it elicits a bit of a smile. Like I said, not laugh out loud funny, but it's still something. It's still something to give the audience a tiny bit of a break. And of course, it also serves as a good character moment to once again establish that even though they are together in all of this and they are working together, that doesn't mean Fang wants to be treated like some pack animal. Like I said, she sees herself as equal to Spear, so she's not going to be reduced to that sort of thing. Or even just a subtle little moment where, after they first make the kill, Spear is skinning the mammoth to make some warmer clothes for this harsh winter environment. He throws a huge swath of fur over top of Fang as a nice gesture to keep her warm, and she just does this little shimmy thing until it shakes off the end of her tail, and without even looking up from eating. It's something that you would kind of expect an animal to do, of course, so it does provide a little bit of amusement. But everything else is just hardcore in this episode. In an earlier video covering trailers for Primal, I mentioned that it looked like the show wasn't really gonna go for some sort of black and white morality play. It looked like it was going to be set in a world where there aren't really any heroes or villains. It's just kill or be killed, survival of the fittest. That's the law of the land, and in such a world there are no good guys and bad guys. There's just people who need to survive. And interestingly enough, in that video, I specifically referenced the scene of them hunting the mammoth, saying something to the effect of, that mammoth probably didn't do anything to them, but they've got to kill it if they want to live. And it turns out it's the mammoth episode that really drives home the point that this is exactly what kind of show that is. It's exactly what it's going for, but not only that, it pulls it off spectacularly. So the primary conflict of this episode is that once the mammoths find out the old-timer has been killed, they start hunting down Fang and Spear to get revenge. But of course, when you first hear that plot description and you see the beginning of the episode where the old-timer gets left behind and essentially abandoned, you're kind of thinking, well, they clearly didn't care. Why are they even bothering? They seem like the villains, so you know what? Screw the mammoths. But it doesn't prove to be that simple. When they first find the body, The one who's apparently the leader, he's identified by having his own scars on his face. He uses his trunk to sort of feel around the body, and he realizes the tusks are missing. And this is what sets him off. So it's clearly not just revenge they're looking for. It's not some hollow gesture of, you killed one of our own, so now we're going to kill you. Because ultimately that would be kind of pointless. I mean, like I said, they left the old guy behind and he was gonna die anyway. So why would they bother seeking revenge unless they were looking for trouble? That's at least what you think at first. And surprisingly, these mammoths give Spear and Fang a run for their money. I mean, they are... This is a... I guess they do sort of have the home advantage, being that this is their frozen territory, but they very nearly win. And it's quite possible they would have killed them both until Spear makes an unexpected discovery. Ironically, while trying to defend himself. He grabs the last fragment of the old-timer's tusk and starts swinging it around like a weapon. And surprisingly, that keeps the other mammoths away, but it's not because they're afraid. And he has this realization after he's done swinging it around like a maniac with an axe. He sees the expression on the leader's face, and then he puts two and two together. He realizes, oh, they come for this. So he offers it to them, they take it, and then the episode ends with this hauntingly beautiful mammoth funeral. It's not the sort of thing you'd expect. You kind of at first think the mammoths are just animals, but over the course of the episode it becomes clear that they are smarter than they first appear. And they have this whole graveyard full of their fallen comrades, and all they wanted was at least the tusk of this old one, so they could bury it and pay homage to the dead. It actually shows that Spear is not unique in that regard. He honors the dead just as the mammoths do. It's slightly different because Spear honors the dead whether he has taken their life directly or not, but the mammoths at the very least honor their own. And like I said, this really emphasizes the idea that this isn't a morality tale of some sort. It's not about a clash of ideologies. The mammoths have their rituals, certainly, but this doesn't seem like it's because they represent a particular ideal. They just... They seem to understand that kill or be killed is the law of the land. They're not upset that the old-timer died. If they were, they might have immediately blamed it on the saber-toothed wolves that were scavenging on his corpse and attacked them. But they don't do that. They just let the wolves go. What sets them off is the fact that they have no way to remember him, no way to mark his existence to future generations, which is why they have the graveyard and the tusks. As soon as they have that, they let Spear and Fang go. And there you have it. I think this is a good example, therefore, of how you can do a kind of story where there really aren't heroes and villains. You can still have protagonists and antagonists, certainly. But I've seen far too many stories that try to go for that everything is shades of gray idea, only for it to not quite work out where it's completely gray because you have ideologies attached to them. Ultimately, someone's going to come along, experience that story, and whichever ideology fits their own worldview more is the side they're going to take and say, that side's right, the other side is wrong. But here in Primal, you get the sense that none of the creatures we've seen so far truly are right or wrong. Even as far back as episode 1, where we have the closest thing we've got to true villains in the form of those giant horned dinosaurs that eat the children, you still understand on some level that they're just doing what carnivores do. It's not that they're doing it maliciously, they're doing it to survive. It's just that they are especially cruel in how they go about doing it. But it's a cold death that really drives it home. Spear and Fang are not the villains, even though they do kill a mammoth unprovoked. The mammoths are not the villains, even though they go out of their way to get back at the people who killed that mammoth. Neither side is truly good or evil in this scenario. They just have their own ways, and as long as those ways don't interfere with anything that they need to do, or that they perhaps want to do, then there is no conflict. But when there is that interference, that's where the conflict arises. I mean, of course, it's easy to avoid exploring ideology in this series, given that it's set in a world where ideology hasn't been invented yet, but even so, maybe that's part of the trick. The last thing I can think of to discuss about this episode is that, having seen the whole series up to this point, and having paid attention to the relationship between Spear and Fang, I do wonder if they're hinting at the possibility of maybe the two splitting up by the end. It is possible, because we've established, like I said at the beginning, they do have certain differences that keep them from being 100% in sync. What I think this episode solidifies for me is that the key difference is empathy. Spear has a lot of empathy in him, and he has empathy for all creatures, even those that he ultimately needs to kill. Fang has empathy too, let's not forget that. We've gone this far and we can tell that she does care, but she only cares about certain individuals, certain creatures that she has deemed worth the effort. She felt empathetic towards her children, may they rest in peace, and she feels empathetic towards Spear. But she couldn't care less about the mammoth's life. She doesn't bow her head and pay respect. She just digs in. And I wonder if that difference is going to ultimately drive them apart. It almost did in episode 2. We know it can happen. It's just a question of whether or not that will become an irreconcilable difference. It would be unfortunate if it happened, certainly, but if handled right, it could also be the only possible outcome. We will see. It's not that I want to see them divided. I just wonder if that's what they're hinting at. But either way, that was a cold death. And now I just wait for episode 4 to come along so I can review that one as well. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.